Welcome to the Lapis Guides Introduction to QGIS Tutorials. Today we're going to be going through Module 1, Part 2. Basically, it's just a continuation of the Part 1, where we learned how to import an open source map, and then how to produce vectors over top of that, polygons, lines, and point vectors, and then modify those vectors with different shapes, colors, symbols, etc. Today in part 2, we're going to be working with how do we get this into what we call the print composer, where we can create a final map as a JPEG, complete with a scale bar, titles, key, all those different things that we can put onto a map. All right, so let's go ahead and get started. You should still have the file for your island that you created in the last tutorial, and that's what we're going to be using. We left a couple things unfinished on purpose so that we could make those changes while in Print Composer so that you can see how quick and easy it is to update your Print Composer to your new changes that you create. But first of all, we need to get to the Print Composer. We're going to go up to Project, New Print Layout, and you can give it a name if you want to. I'm not going to bother. All right, super. Okay, and depending on the shape of your island, right? Mine is quite large up and down in a vertical, and so I don't actually want to be using a landscape style background. So it's really easy to switch that over. You just right click and you can go Page Properties. You end up with this over here. You can also create custom sizes in here, right? You can go down to Custom and you could basically tell it what size you want it to be, right? You can also just leave it as an A4, which I think works well, and just change your portrait. All right, change that to portrait, and we'll zoom out just a little bit. Okay, and I want to make a new section. So I'm going to go over here and click the Adds a New Map to the Layout button, right? Basically, where I click and drag, it's going to create a square. Now, I want to cover the entire canvas. So I'm going to do something like that. Now, as I mentioned, some things were left slightly unfinished, right? I'm personally not a huge fan of how the shape burst does this outline kind of halo. So what I want to do is I want to come in, right, and you can kind of see how that is here on our original working space. So what I want to do, I want to double click on that layer and choose this piece here. And we're going to keep it as a shape burst fill, but I'm going to change the blur all the way up. I'm going to scoot it over just a little bit so we can see. I click apply and that automatically makes it a whole lot better. But I'm still not completely happy. I want to change, instead of from whole shape, I want to do set distance. And you can play with the numbers. 200 seems to be a good number for this. And we still get a little bit of that gradient in there, but it doesn't have that really strong halo effect. Right, so I've made those changes in my original file. So now I'm going to go to Print Composer, and any changes that I create there, they haven't shown up yet. But all I need to do is I need to click the refresh button here, and it fixes that. Okay, next thing, the island is a little bit small for this large canvas that I'm working with, and we can play with that by going here, clicking this move item. We can zoom in, we can zoom out. Right, now I can zoom out and it's too far away. I can zoom in and it's too close. It doesn't have the whole thing in here. Right, so I'm going to have to manually adjust my scale. So I'm going to go here where in item properties I can adjust my scale. Right, and let's try 200,000. It's not quite right. Let's try 250,000. Okay, looks a lot better. Yeah, that looks good. Okay, so another thing that I can do, come down here. I always like adding a frame, and we'll just increase the thickness on that a little bit. 0.7 and 0.8 generally are about what I like to use, because it's thick enough that you can see it, but it's not so thick that it looks terrible. All right, the next thing that I want to do, I want to give my island map a title. All right, so I'm going to come over here to this button. It just adds a new label or a title. I drag my cursor, I create a box. I can type my title in there, and I'm going to call it Faroe Island Research Station. All right. Now it's small, it's unreadable, yeah. So we got to do a little bit of changing here. I always like to have it center and middle. That's my personal preference there. I'm going to put a frame around it just like before. Again, 0.7 or 0.8. I'm going to add a background. I'm going to change my color. I'm going to pick, so it's the same color as my island there. All right. Now I'm also going to change my font size. All right. As it gets bigger, it goes to expand into that shape. All right. So now I want to just kind of move it around. I can put it up in the corner like that. I can kind of center it in this space here. I'm pretty happy with that. Okay, the next thing I want to do, I want to make a scale bar. All right, so that there's a sense of scale to the island. You know, is this 500 kilometers across? Is this 500 meters across? It's hard to tell without a scale bar. So click this button over here. I'm going to drag it, and it'll automatically create the size that fits what's here. So I'm going to work with the style a little bit. I always like to use line ticks up, down, or middle. I don't know, I just feel like the line ticks look a whole lot nicer. I'm going to go line ticks down. Okay, and it's automatically going to put these in as kilometers, which is great. And I'm going to add a couple extra in here. And let's do this by 2. All right, that's looking good. 0 to 10, and as before, I always like to have that frame and the background because it helps set it apart. And we'll pick that same color. Great. Zoom in on that a little bit. Yeah, it's better. Okay. Kind of line it up so that it looks good there. And the last thing that we want is a key. All right, and we'll do the same thing. Just use our cursor. We'll drag to make a key. And the key automatically comes in with all of the layers that were on our original layer panel, right? We don't need to say that this is a road. It's fairly obvious that that's a road. It's also fairly obvious that this is an island. It's also, we don't need to have it tell us this. It's not even there. So there's some things that we don't need to have in our key. So let's figure out how to clean that up a little bit. Okay, we can give a title to our key. Right, so we could call this key, or we could call it legend, or we can leave it blank, which is what I usually prefer to do. Okay, so to get rid of all of this extra stuff, we need to unselect auto update. All right, so now we can select these, we can remove them, and those disappear. All right. I want to give some titles, some more information to these, so I double click, and this one was my research base. Right? And this one was my docking station. Right, and I don't really need it to say Faroe Island points. Right, so I'm just going to double click this. I'm going to delete the text, press OK, and that removes itself. Right, and again, I always like to have a frame. It's already got a background. Well, let's change that color. Let's move that down so it fits nicely there. But it seems like there's a lot of extra space on the top compared to the bottom, and it's really easy to take care of that. We go down to space, and we do the title space. We just make that a little bit smaller. Right, so now it's at 0, so we don't have that gap at the top. All right, and we'll move it down. You can use the arrows on your keyboard for that. And we can also go to the fonts, go to item font. We can make this a little bit bigger if we want to, so it's easier to read. All right, so one thing that I really like to do with most of my maps that require this, not all of them do, but a lot of them, it's really useful to have a compass rose so that people know kind of the orientation of your map. And it's really simple to put one of those in. We can just go to add a new picture. All right. We'll just make a little square here. And you're going to need to have an image already downloaded. So you can go onto Google Images, go to, make sure that you have the usage rights for those. So generally anything that's Creative Commons, you're allowed to use. All right. And that's the one that I want to use. And there we go. It pops up. Again, I'm going to put a little bit of a background on that because it's kind of hard to see actually without that. All right. Change my color. Great. I'm going to put a frame on it as well. All right, so you can play around with where you want to put stuff. You can make your map look the way that you want to. I'm going to kind of scoot this just a little bit over here. Give it a bit more space. All right, now we've created a map. We've got a title. We have a key, a scale bar, compass rose. What's next? Well, we want to be able to save it, right? And generally, we're going to save this as something like a JPEG. All right, so all you need to do is you need to go up here. There's a few different options. You can just print it. Okay, you can export it as an image, an SVG, PDF. So you just go ahead and click on export as image, and I'm going to give it the name Faroe Island final map. Save that. It's going to ask you a few options here. This is generally pretty good. You can increase your DPI if you want to whatever, or you can decrease it if you don't need as high of a quality file. But yeah, it should be fine. And click save. I'll save that, and there we go. Not bad. So obviously this isn't using any of the data that you are collecting from Lapis Guides yet, but for you to be able to do a lot of the work later on, you're going to need to know how to create these vectors. Using the print composer is going to be something you do almost every single time that you use QGIS to create a final product. So yes, it was just a fun little fictitious island project, but by doing this, you've learned how to produce vectors, how to modify vectors, how to use open source mapping, how to load plugins, how to do smoothing of geometry. You've learned how to do the print composer. There's a whole lot of things that you've learned that you're going to be using in the next steps for actual data management. I hope you were able to follow along well with these two tutorials on Module 1. Let me know if there's anything that I missed or could have done better, or if you have any questions. And I'll see you next time in Module 2, where we'll learn how to work a little bit with a simple data set.